Out of gusto, and many times yesterday. Tim Wilson, Melbourne D's supporter, you hold the seat of Goldstein, which my recollection is pretty much St Kilda territory. But are you a doggy for a day as well?
I'm sorry, Jim, that's just fundamentally wrong. My voice is actually a bit dusty today, and I'm struggling because I was at the G shouting so hard for the doggies. Yesterday, we were all doggies. But if you actually go to the federal electorate of Goldstein, most people are either St Kilda or they're Demons fans. So I am very comfortably placed in my community. But as I said before, yesterday, we were all doggies. It was going off at Sandringham Yacht Club yesterday afternoon. There were lots of people wearing the blue, the white and the red and proud of this great Victorian institution. And it was a wonderful day.
Yes, your voice is suffering somewhat, so we do appreciate you for turning up today.
I really did yell hard. Timmy, this is the first time I was barracking for you and and for your team, and enjoy it because there were points where I was leaping out of the chair with excitement.
Jim, I can testify. I think I did spot him in the crowd a couple of times, and so fair play, Tim.
Now, look, we had better move on. We could talk football all day. It could be AFL and NRL indeed, but let's move on. Look, first of all, Tim Watts, I want to come to something that Lisa Singh said to me on Weekend Agenda yesterday from New York. She's been in New York where, among other things, of course, the refugee summit was underway. But among other things, she had this to say. Have a look.
Any attempts by our government to get this resolved as soon as possible, of course, would be welcomed if it was to a country or a situation that had a positive outcome. Now, I still believe that if they cannot find a positive country to settle refugees that are in those offshore detention facilities, then they are going to have to look at our own country. They cannot continue to leave them there. The Papua New Guinea government have said they are closing down Manus Island. So, you know, the question still remains, what is the Turnbull government going to do about this issue?
Now, Tim Watts, earlier today on Sky News talking to Elizabeth Tilley, your immigration spokesman Shane Newman upbraided Senator Singh for making those remarks, saying that she ought to know what Labor policy is. But this is a matter of considerable sensitivity for the Labor Party, is it not? There was a heartfelt debate at the last national conference, a very difficult debate indeed. We saw a number of Labor candidates during the election campaign being reminded of things they'd said previously about resettlement of asylum seekers. It is going to be a problem for you in the years ahead, and Lisa Singh is just an example of that.
Well, look, Jim, I can understand Lisa's frustration at the current state of affairs. I mean, where we are now is 3 years into government from the Abbott-Turnbull government. They've had 3 years to deal with the future of these people whose fate has been unknown to them for an extended period of time, and that is destroying the mental health and the psychological well-being of these people. So we do need a resolution quickly on this. But Shane Newman's exactly right. I mean, Labor's policy on this is crystal clear. We do not support these people being resettled in Australia. That's not to say that it is not a straightforward thing for Peter Dutton to get on the phone to the UNHCR, to get on the phone to other countries as potential settlement options, countries like New Zealand, we've said in the past. This is eminently solvable. The government's had 3 years to do it. They've got no one to blame but themselves for the current situation. So I can understand Lisa's frustration with the incompetence of Peter Dutton, but the proposition that she's made is not Labor policy and it's not the right way to go.
Now, Tim Wilson, I dare say you've already got your talking points right there and ready to go, but I want to ask you this, which is...
Jim, I've worked in this area of policy for years. I don't need talking points, mate.
All right, didn't mean to insult you, but there you go. Look, Malcolm Turnbull was in the United States a week or so ago where it became revealed that he was in the midst of a deal whereby Australia might take refugees from Costa Rica. The thing that perplexes me about that is not that that should be on the agenda, but at a time where this government has talked about a regional resettlement of refugees and asylum seekers for a long time. And indeed, at that refugee summit in New York, effectively there was talk about global resettlement. There are something like 62 million displaced people around the world, 20 million refugees looking for somewhere to go. Why was that not a quid pro quo, that if we are to take some refugees from Costa Rica, that the United States at least consider taking some of the refugees, as they've been determined, from Manus and from Nauru?
Well, clearly that's a question for the Immigration Minister, Jim, but what I do know is that we are taking our share and obligation of people seeking asylum around the world. We're increasing the number and we're seeking to work with other countries. And what is very important is to focus on how we can get people out of detention centres and resettle to third countries, and that is what the government has been working towards. And what doesn't help in trying to achieve that objective is when the papered over fault line in the ALP, which is that they ultimately want to resettle people in Manus and Nauru in Australia, gets ripped open, because that just sends a message to the people smugglers that there are people in Australia who basically don't believe in the strength and the protection of our border security. That's what we heard yesterday from Lisa Singh, and that is, it's only been a papered over fault line because we know it was one of the big division points within Labor during the election, and it's going to continue to be one which is going to create headaches for trying to solve the problem for the government.
Tim Watts, is that right? Just papered over? It does seem to be a bit that way, that people are pragmatically within the Labor Party accepting the fact that unless Labor goes down this line and there's no gap between the government and Labor about this issue, you will lose votes, and that's in part at least why you've adopted this awkward for many of your members' policy.
No, that's absolutely not the case, Jim. At the last national conference of the Australian Labor Party, Bill Shorten showed real leadership on this issue. There were a range of views expressed. The Labor Party came together in an open forum and resolved an agreed position that all of our members are committed to. Now, Bill Shorten has shown leadership. He's met contrary views, and we're now united behind a single view. This week, we saw that Malcolm Turnbull was a fake Sydney Swans fan when he couldn't even get to the second line of the Swans team song. But we've known for a very long time that he's a fake leader. He can't say two lines in the Parliament without checking the words with George Christensen, Erica Betts, Corey Bernardi, the extremists in his party.
What a load of rubbish. When it comes down to it, what we know is we have a challenge around making sure...
What does Malcolm Turnbull stand for,
One of the biggest challenges, Tim, that we have as a country is making sure that we resettle people for going for legitimate claims for asylum and becoming refugees. And what we know is that, as you just outlined, the Labor Party's taken a formal policy position. It is one that the Labor Party MPs have consistently undermined at every point and have constantly talked about bringing people in Manus and Nauru to Australia. And what we know is that when refugees get to decide the location of their resettlement, it completely undermines the system of supporting people who are facing persecution overseas. And we've seen that in Europe, where asylum seekers decide which country they want to go to. And it isn't just a collapse in support for legitimate asylum seekers who do face issues of persecution. It has a negative impact on accepting legal migration. And this is the reality that Labor can talk about any sort of different spin and talking point that they want, as Tim has just gone on. This is a fundamentally important issue for this country, and their weakness and preparedness to undermine Australia's border security is critical to the credibility of the Labor Party and where they understand the challenges facing this country.
Tim, the only spin going on here is what Malcolm Turnbull did at the New York conference on asylum seekers. 65 million people, it's an unprecedented humanitarian crisis since the Second World War. Malcolm Turnbull arrived at the New York conference with a reheated policy that had already been announced by Scott Morrison, claiming an increased intake, when we know that it's already, and it's still, a reduced intake compared to what the previous government was taking.
That policy was elected.
What we need to resolve this issue is an international agreement consistent with what we had in response to the Indo-Chinese crisis, where Australia played a part with a number of developed countries in the region to resettle people, a large number of whom in my electorate and are now Footscray fans along with me, real members of our society. That's what we need to respond to this issue.
Tim,
not more political spin from Malcolm Turnbull.
Nobody is disputing any of that. We are working to resettle people in third countries. What doesn't make it achievable, what undermines that policy setting, is when Labor decides to expose its deep fault line on this issue. You've just highlighted, and the discussion has highlighted today, the Labor Party took a position at a policy level at its national conference. What we saw during the election and what we've seen since the election, particularly with Lisa Singh's comments yesterday, is that it does not enjoy support. And the reality is that sends a message to the people smugglers in Indonesia and other places and encourages them to test our border security. That is the problem. That is what we are trying to address, to resettle people, but to do it where we preserve and protect our borders. That is the foundation of good policy in the interests of all Australians and, might I point out, legitimate refugees who are seeking escape from persecution, who have made it, who go through lawful channels.
Look, it is always a spirited conversation about this question. It is a serious issue, not just for Australia, but for the world as a whole. 62 million displaced people, as I said. Tim Watts, Tim Wilson, I do appreciate your contributions on this. Thank you very much. Congratulations again to Tim Watts for the Bulldogs' victory. Pity about the D's. Maybe next year, Tim Wilson. But
2017 is our year. 2017 is our year.
Not if Tim Watts has anything to do with it, I'm sure. But I'm sure that as far as the NRL Grand Final tonight, you'll both be on the side of the storm. There'll be a lot of Sydney-siders who will talk you down for that. Not least of them, of course, Scott Morrison. Plenty more about the upcoming NRL Grand Final. Not that far away. After the break, back with sport. Do stick around.